Welcome back to History Saver 1941. Today, I am in Evergreen Cemetery. As you can see the gatehouse behind me. We are right here near East Cemetery Hill, and one of the most famous places in American history. So let's talk a little bit about 7 years ago. So around November of 1863, a few months after the Battle of Gettysburg, there was something that needed to be done about the men who fell during the battle for both sides, the North and the South. The battlefield was left in carnage. Men were strewn about. They picked up bodies and pieces forever. Meade has said he didn't have time to pick up the aftermath of the battle. And it was certainly devastating to the town. A lot of the town had been hit with artillery fire, civilians have been killed, buildings have been destroyed, and the town was at the center point of it. Gettysburg was nevertheless left in shambles. But what was more important was all of the men who were actually killed. The building you see behind me is the train station here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. This is the original train station from 1863. The governor of Pennsylvania appointed David Willis, who is a local lawyer of types here, and he appointed him to help commemorate a cemetery for the fallen. They hired a speaker, and we'll get into that in just a few moments. But after a few months, they said, well, maybe we need to invite Abraham Lincoln and see if he wants to give some remarks. Abraham Lincoln accepted the invitation, and the rest, as you guys know, is history. November the 18th, 1863, let's fast forward here. Abraham Lincoln leaves Washington, D.C. by rail, and he comes to this location here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the Gettysburg train station. This is where he arrives. Pretty neat to see the actual rail line where Abraham Lincoln came into Gettysburg. So as you walk along this path, you can only imagine what the town was feeling. There was so many people here ready to see this invocation from Abraham Lincoln and the Edward Everett, who they had to give the leading speech, leading into Abraham Lincoln's speech, which was to be, of course, the Gettysburg Address. Edward Everett ended up speaking for like 2 hours. Lincoln spoke for a little over 2 minutes. And his words hit home so much that we all know what the Gettysburg Address is now. So once Lincoln landed here at the railway station, he was invited to stay in the home of David Willis, the man who was appointed here in Gettysburg to help out with the cemetery. So now we're going to head right up the street here of the town square to the David Ellis house. Now you can find a little placard here, and this is much how the railway station appeared in 1888, just a few years after Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. This was first built in 1958. So taking a look at this now, this railway station looks much as the same as it did then. So it's a perfect time to take you through and show you downtown Gettysburg. Just past this, as we're making our way to the David Willis house, the Majestic Theater opened in 1925 and was the site of many important White House, well, there's a truck. Okay, so that's going by. This was the site of many White House press conferences, and the administration of President Dwight D. Eisenhower was all here a lot of the time, because this is where President Dwight D. Eisenhower actually lived, was in Gettysburg. This also is where the movie Gettysburg was premiered in 1993, which, if you're a Gettysburg fan, a lot of you guys know about that movie. But this is the theater in which it premiered. So pretty cool. Let's keep making our way to the town square, shall we? So we all know what Lincoln's words of the Gettysburg Address said, and we're going to get into those once we hit the cemetery. A lot of trucks here, a lot of trucks. But this is town square of Gettysburg. This is where 10 roads intersect. So we are now in the town of Gettysburg, and this is where the Union Army was falling back to, in this location. Chambersburg Street is to the right, and the Union Army was following this path for the most part of pushing back through the town of Gettysburg, all while still taking fire. So the building you see in front of me here on town square of Gettysburg, there's the town square, is at David Wills' house. This is where Lincoln stayed. A lot of you guys may be wondering, once the truck gets out the way here, where Lincoln penned the Gettysburg Address. Well, I think Lincoln penned the Gettysburg Address over time. And, wow, a lot of trucks. Really busy intersection here. But the night of the 18th, November 18th, 1863, Lincoln come right here to the David Willis house. The David Wills house is where Lincoln stayed, and it is where he will pen the closing remarks of the Gettysburg Address. So for those of you who want to know where the Gettysburg Address was actually written, it was right here within this building. And this is where he penned the closing remarks of what would become one of the nation's most important documents ever written. So this was erected in 1814. It was here during the Battle of Gettysburg. This is where David Wills, who was a lawyer, lived, and he accepted Abraham Lincoln as his guest on the 18th and 19th. Here Lincoln met Governor Curtin and others and greeted the public, and this is where he actually completed the Gettysburg Address. So we're not going in the building because we just don't have the time, and I don't even know if it's open, but this is where Lincoln actually penned the final steps of the Gettysburg Address before he made his way to Evergreen Cemetery, which is just down the street in this location here. So right now we're going to head to the Evergreen Cemetery, and we're going to see where Lincoln made his famous speech that echoes in American history. Pretty cool. So I'm standing here at the gatehouse of Evergreen Cemetery here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Of course, this place was synonymous because of the Battle of Gettysburg. You see so many photographs behind me here of this place, and those photographs were some of my favorite from the Battle of Gettysburg. But I'm not here to talk about the Battle of Gettysburg this morning per se. I'm here to talk about the Lincoln Gettysburg Address. The address that Lincoln gave here in Gettysburg for the commemoration of this cemetery, basically helping re-intern the soldiers who lost their lives here in Gettysburg. Now, we're going to get to that in a moment, but let's go inside and take a look. So we're walking through the gatehouse of Evergreen Cemetery, and I got to tell you, this is a surreal feeling. I've always dreamed of walking through this, and I just completed a 6-year-old's dream here in doing this. You know, some of the pictures, you see a window or door here, and it's pretty cool to see that in person where it once was. And there were some items here. I think there was a table here and some stuff. You can tell I've studied the photographs, but pretty cool. Now, before we start talking about Lincoln, I did come across something here in the cemetery that intrigued me, and that is there's an artillery position here from the Army of the Potomac Artillery Reserve, 2nd Volunteer Brigade of the 5th New York Light Artillery. There is literally guns everywhere here. Artillery is everywhere. So apparently July the 2nd, these guns arrived and were halted and parked about 10 a.m., moved to Evergreen Cemetery at 3:30 p.m., and engaged from 4 p.m. until dark. 2 guns posted in the cemetery firing westwardly, 4 guns south and facing Baltimore Pike, firing on a Confederate battery on Benner's Hill. So we were on the first day, Benner's Hill. Engaged at intervals in the same position until 4 p.m. on July the 3rd, when relieved by 3 of the guns on the Baltimore Pike. Casualties of the battery were 1 man killed, 2 men wounded. So 1 man actually died in a cemetery fighting during the Battle of Gettysburg. How? I mean, that's got to stink, man. You're in a cemetery fighting, and you die right here in the cemetery. Man, tragic. And that's what the Battle of Gettysburg was. It was so tragic. So July the 1st, 1863, Union forces under General Meade and defeat those of the Confederate Army, who were up under the command of General Lee here in Gettysburg. More than 51,000 soldiers are killed on both sides of that battle. They are killed, wounded, or missing. Bates recalled Lincoln was in the telegraph office hour after hour upon receiving the news of the Battle of Gettysburg during the days and nights that this was happening. So, July the 5th, Lee's troops have been defeated here in Gettysburg. They leave Gettysburg without being pursued by the Union Army. And Lee thought that Meade should have pursued him. He said this could have possibly ended the war here. This is possibly what could have ended the American Civil War if Meade had just pursued the Confederates. Well, he did it. July the 6th, Lincoln writes to General Hancock expressing concern that the Confederate Army is being allowed to withdraw from Gettysburg unhindered. So he writes to me saying, hey, why aren't you pursuing these guys? What's going on here? You know, you need to get on it. You need to take care of this. July the 7th, in a response to a serenade at the White House, Lincoln gives a short impromptu speech, which is said to be foreshadowing the Gettysburg Address. On July the 14th, 1863, Lincoln writes a letter of reproach to General Meade, but he doesn't send it. John Hay, a White House secretary, writes in his diary about the Lincoln grief over Meade's opportunity to end the war. So Meade has lost his opportunity to end the American Civil War because he just didn't pursue Lee after he had the chance to. Thought this was neat walking through there. You remember us talking about the Spangler farm? There's a grave of Henry Spangler. And here's the grave of George Spangler and his wife, Elizabeth. Okay, so here's the deal. As we walk through here, I want to talk to you a little bit about why I'm not in the soldiers portion of the cemetery. Why am I in the regular portion of the cemetery? Well, let's take a look at a couple of things. So September the 23rd, 1863, Edward Everett, a nationally renowned orator, is invited as the main speaker for the Gettysburg Cemetery dedication, which you see in front of me on the other side of these cannons. He is known as a man who can speak, but he's known as a speaker, okay? But he writes them back and says, you know, because the original speech was supposed to happen, the dedication was supposed to happen on October the 23rd, 1863, but he requested more time to prepare. So David Wills, the Gettysburg lawyer assigned to handle arrangements for the cemetery dedication, invites Lincoln to give a appropriate few words. He said, hey, maybe we should get Lincoln to do this. So they called David Wills, and he calls around and he's like, hey, let's write to Lincoln, and Lincoln accepts. So November the 2nd, David Wills, you know, says, hey, let's call Lincoln. Lincoln accepts. He says, hey, well, you can stay in my house. Okay. So November 17th, William Saunders of the U.S. Agricultural comes to the White House to show Lincoln his designs for the soldier cemetery. November 18th, Lincoln gets to the train station here at Gettysburg, goes to the Wills home, where he completes his address, which is very short comparatively to Everett's 2-hour speech that takes place. And November 19th, the procession comes up from the town of Gettysburg in this direction. And comes here, where the soldiers in front of us are interred. Everett gives a 2-hour speech. A 2-hour speech. Lincoln gives a 2.5-minute or approximate speech. A lot of people want to know. Where did Lincoln give that speech from, and why am I not on this side of the fence? Well, that's because this fence was put here after the speech that Lincoln gave, known as the Gettysburg Address. This fence actually come from in front of the White House. It was donated to here, the property. So this fence was actually in front of the White House, across from the White House at one point in Washington, D.C. Okay, so this was a gift. But why am I standing on this side of the fence and not on that side of the fence? Well, that's because in this area right here is where the podium stood, where Lincoln administered the Gettysburg Address. Okay, you want to ask yourself, Josh, how is that possible when there's graves here? These tombstones are earlier, or later rather, than the Gettysburg Address. They were put here after. This is the spot where Lincoln stood and gave that famous speech. And a lot of people will argue the Gettysburg speech, I've heard, is in this location. Well, the Gettysburg speech is not in that location that you see before you. The Gettysburg Address was actually said in this exact spot. These graves behind me were not here at the time. They were not dated to the time of the Gettysburg Address. And this has been studied over and over. This has been, you know, studied by some of the nation's top historians. But the Gettysburg Address was actually administered from this exact location that I'm standing now. That's the reason why I'm not on this side of the fence. That's the reason why I'm on this side of the fence. Because this fence was not here. This is actually the spot where the Gettysburg Address was actually said. Now, a lot of people will say the Gettysburg Address was read, you know, right here where this monument is in front of us. Well, that is not the truth. The truth is it was actually in this location. And if you go back and watch some of the videos with American Battlefield Trust, you'll find some of those videos that kind of explain a little bit more in detail about why and how and all of that good jazz. But the Gettysburg Address was read somewhere in this location is where the podium once stood. And looking out, you can see all of these people here watching Lincoln administer this Gettysburg Address. Now, photos. There's been a lot of controversy about Lincoln's photos that he took when he was here in Gettysburg. There's not a lot of photos. Why didn't he take more? Well, I don't know the answer to that. There's only one known photograph of Lincoln actually giving his speech, and we don't even know for sure if that's Lincoln in the photograph. It's been argued time and time again. Is this Lincoln that was standing there, or is this another guy? Well, I'm going to show you that photograph right now, but you can make the judgment for yourself. Is it Lincoln? I don't know. I can't tell you. I'm not going to try to tell you because I don't know the truth of it. But they say it's Lincoln. But this is the approximate area where the podium stood for the Lincoln Gettysburg Address. So, pretty cool. You know a little bit about history that you didn't know? I completely urge you to go check out the History Underground. Go check out JD. He's got some awesome information from his series here on Gettysburg. Also, go check out the American Battlefield Trust. Those guys do an outstanding job in preservation here in Gettysburg. It's my favorite source of information to go to, and I know once you watch their videos, it will be your favorite source of information to go to. And they actually have a really good video on what I'm telling you right now. So I am standing in the exact spot where Lincoln administered his Gettysburg Address. How cool is that?
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation,
conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place to those who gave their lives that that nation might live.
It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract.
The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it will never forget what they did here.
It is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so nobly advanced.
It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us. That from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion.
That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God
Shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people,
By the people,
for the people,
shall not perish from the earth.
shall not perish from the earth.
shall not perish from this earth. Those are the powerful words of who very well may be the greatest American president who has ever lived, Abraham Lincoln. And let us not forget that he who does not know history will be doomed to repeat it. So keep preserving history, keep saving history, and above all, keep living history. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I truly appreciate it, and we will catch you in the next video. See you then. Peace.